today we are going to talk about a very important choice that you and I need to make, and it's this. We're going to be talking about choosing control or surrender. Okay, let me say it again. Today we're going to be talking about control or surrender. Okay, you've got to make a choice. You are going to live a life where you are white knuckling stuff, where you are being a control freak. Come on, somebody. Or living a life that is surrendering all things to Christ. You know, when it comes to being a control freak, I think that all of us have a little bit of it in us, right? Especially if you're a leader at any capacity, whether you're a mom or dad, or maybe you're a spouse, you know, leading in the family dynamic. Maybe you're leading in a church or in the job place. All of us at some capacity are leading in some area. And there's this drive many times to control things. And I mean, it could be in the simplest things. You got some of you control freaks out there. You're like, you can't fold a towel like this. You got to fold the towel like this. And you're just driving people nuts up in the house. You got other people that are vacuuming and they got to have a specific pattern as they're vacuuming. And you're like, I don't care anything about vacuuming. But then I go out in your yard and man, you've got perfect lines, right? The car has to be perfectly detailed in a specific way. And we do this first and this second and this third. How about our other control freaks that I like to call them the side seat drivers or the back seat drivers? They got that imaginary brake that they're over there pumping, man, the whole time you're driving. And I'm going to tell you, you're sick, people, if you've ever reached over and grabbed the wheel while somebody else is driving. Of course, I'm messing with you. But come on, that's really being controlling. There's many times where I've been driving with Veronica and she's like, you know, she freaks out and I'm like having a heart attack. Like, I'm not going to crash because I wasn't paying attention. I'm going to crash because she nearly killed me with the heart attack. You know, she's like, you know, and she's like, and I'm like, no, I saw that. I got it. I'm just telling on her just a little bit. She drives me bonkers sometimes when we're driving. But there's this control thing that many of us have. And today I believe that God is going to help you define what are the things that you do need to control, what are the things that you need to surrender, and what does it mean to live this surrendered life? I want to help you make a good choice today. See, when we feel like we have to be in control of things, even like if it's just in the real natural things, you may be thinking, what's the big deal? You know, I like my towels folded a certain way, or I like my shirts hung up, or I like things dry cleaned. I don't put these things in the washer. We have all these little, laws. You know, the Pharisees had 600 laws. Some of us, man, you got like way more laws than that. Little rules. And what it does is it can damage your relationship with people. It can damage your relationship with God. It can do a lot of damage when we take control of things that God is actually calling us to surrender. And often that control, what it is, it's kind of an underneath the surface, kind of beneath the surface type thing of really, it's a spiritual issue that you need to deal with. Because often we take control over things that God should be in control of. And you're taking the place as the head over your life when God needs to be head over your life. Ego comes into play. Ego, as we've defined here at Hub City many times, is that ego is edging God out. See, when we start controlling things, and really kind of like, this is my box, this is my life, this is how I do it, this is how it's going to happen, and you have your whole future planned out, and you've edged God out of your life, you've edged him out of the plans. And I think that one of the things that we have to be careful with is that a lot of us, we love our plans and we have not submitted them to God. And the reality is that many of us, you do make good choices. But here's the reality, and I wrote this down, and I want to read it to you just like this because I don't want to mess it up, is that you can do it better until you can't. Let me say that again. You can do it better until you can't. And there's many times in our lives that we have made sense and we've created this little kind of perfect world that we live in until it goes wrong. And then what do? Then it's like, God, it's all broken and I need you to step in and help. It's kind of like me. I was a young kid. I loved to put those models together. I'd go to the store. I'd save up my money, my birthday money, and I would go and I'd buy a model. And I would look at it on the little box and, oh man, I'm going to build it just like that. And I would get into it and I'm all in control. My dad would be like, hey, you need some help? I'd be like, nah, I don't need any help from anybody, man. I'm going to control this. I'm going to build this thing. I'm going to show you that I can. And the next thing you know, I glue the wrong door on, the right door's on the left side, and it starts looking all messed up. Then I want to take it to my dad. Dad, can you help? I messed it all up. Some of us, that's how our life is characterized, is we are in control until we're not. And today I want to help you make the right decision. Go with me to Proverbs 3, verses 5 through 6. This is such a familiar passage. It's one of the most popular passages in the whole Bible. So many people that I know have completely memorized this verse. Here's the danger in that, is that often when there's something that is familiar to us, we just glaze over it. But today I want to challenge you that as we read this verse, these two verses, that you read it with fresh eyes, that you hear it with fresh ears, that you go, you know what, I'm going to treat this right now in this moment as though this is the very first time I am ever hearing this, okay? Because I believe this is going to be so good for you. See, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says this, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Let's break this down just a little bit. When it comes to control, what God is saying, he's saying, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Listen, your heart is your mind, it's your feelings, it's your emotions. It is who you are. If you were to get rid of the flesh, it's who you are. And God is saying, listen, I want all of that. I want you to trust me with all of that. I want you to be convinced that I have a great plan for you. I want you to be convinced that I'm for you. I want you to be convinced that I'm on your side and that I have a hope and a future for you, that great things are ahead. And that you're trusting, you're going all in. You're not holding anything back. And then he says, lean not on your own understanding. That is where we get in trouble, guys, when it comes to control. Is that often we begin to lean on our own understanding. Well, if I do this, then that's going to lead to this. And then if I talk to that person, then that person's going to join this. And then we'll do this. And we don't realize that often we start creating this little world of control, inviting people in, sometimes manipulating them, sometimes controlling them. And God is like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, that's not my best for you. Trust me. Don't lean on your understanding. You don't got to figure all this out. Trust me. And see what happens, guys, is we get into this cycle. And I want you to pay attention right now to this. This is really important. That if you get anything today, you got to understand this cycle. Is that the more that we try to control, the more we become afraid of losing control. And then the more that we become afraid of losing control, the more that we try to control. So then we try to control more, and the more that we try to control, we become even more afraid of losing control. And this becomes a vicious cycle that so many people are living in. I watch it all the time. They start out trying to control something, and all of a sudden, it's like they get a little bit of control, but then they sense that something's like attacking it, or something's pulling at it, or there's some kind of pressure, and man, they really want to hang in there tight now. Oh no, I can't lose control. I fought so hard to get right here, and I feel like it's slipping, like life, like there's sand, just seeping through your fingers, and you're trying to hang on to it tighter, but the tighter you hang on, it seems like everything's coming out. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about today. And God is saying, stop trusting in yourself. Stop leaning on your own understanding. He's saying here, in all your ways, submit to him. Come to God and just say, God, I'm going to surrender to you. I'm surrendering my marriage. I'm surrendering my kids. I'm surrendering my job. Surrendering my finances. I'm surrendering it all to you, God. And listen to what he says, and he will make your path straight. I love that. He says, path is straight. When something is straight, a path is straight, man, you get there quicker. But see, when you start trusting in yourself, when you start trying to take control over stuff, what you're going to find is your life is going to be characterized with a lot of detours. There is not going to be a straight path. You're going to find yourself out in the bushes and the weeds, getting thorns, hitting cactuses, rocks, getting stuck in ditches, circling around, wasting time. But when God is saying, listen, trust me. Stop trying to take control. Surrender to me. Don't lean on your own understanding. He's saying in all your ways, submit to him. Some translations say acknowledge him, okay? And he will make your path straight. Guys, that is good news. Let's break that cycle. Let's snap out of that cycle of trying to be in control and then being afraid of losing control and then trying to hang on to it even tighter. And then that fear mounts and it grows and it grows. We got to snap out of that, guys. And so why and how? I look at it, one of the reasons that we get in trouble with control is because we're trying to hang on to something that we don't have the strength to actually sustain. I was thinking about a kid. How many of you ever played Red Rover, right? So you'd get one group on one side and they'd all link arms really tight. And then you'd have the other side and they were going to send, so they called somebody from the other side. They're like, Red Rover, send Steven on over. And I would get out and run as fast as I can and try to break through their chain, their arms. And see, they're trying to hang on. And see, many of us are like that in life, is we're trying to hang on, to this thing. We're trying to control it. We're hanging on. And life just comes at you, boom, and just obliterates your hold on things because you weren't strong enough to hold this thing together. Only God is. And that's why I'm challenging you today as we're setting this up. I'm challenging you today to say, you know what? I want to live a surrendered life. God, today, my choice is that I'm relinquishing control. And today, my choice is to surrender. When it comes to this or that, I'm choosing a surrendered life, God. So I want to talk to you about an Old Testament story of when there was a couple that they tried to take control of something and it went really, really bad. And maybe you have your own story of something that you've done in your life where you try to take control and it just went really, really bad. This couple, their name was Abram and Sarai, okay? And as you read in Scripture, God ends up changing their names to Abraham and Sarah. But what happens is God promises them, Abram and Sarai, he says, I'm going to give you a son, and Abram, you will be a father of many. So they have this promise in their heart, man. They have something to look forward to because they hadn't been able to have children. That is such good news. Well, here's the thing is that as they believe God for this promise of a son, this promise that they would have many, many children, they believed, they took it at face value. They were like, God, we trust you. But then something happens. And what happens is nothing happens. So months go by, months, years go by, and nothing happens. And one day, Sarai says, you know what? I'm gonna make this thing, I'm gonna take control right now, and we're gonna make this thing happen. We're gonna do it in our own timing. We're gonna do it in our own way. And so I want you to go with me to Genesis chapter 16, and we're gonna read through verses 1 through 4. It says, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Oh my goodness. This is something that'd be on Jerry Springer, people. And it says, Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. Guys, this thing goes bad because instead of trusting God at his word and saying, God, I'm surrendering this thing to you, this desire to have a child, I'm handing it over to you. I'm trusting you. I'm trusting that your word is true, that you are faithful, and that you will say what you said you were going to do, God. But instead, it took too long. It didn't fit their timeline. So what did she do? Control. What did Abram do? Control. They took control over the situation. And listen, because of the decision that they made, it is so far reaching that their decision unleashed consequences that are actually still in effect today. See, when you look at this lineage, that first boy that was born, okay, out of their control, his name was Ishmael. Okay, and Ishmael was born, and then later, God's promise did come true. They had a son, and his name was Isaac. Okay, when you look at the lineage, though, it's stunning because Ishmael, out of his line, comes the Palestinians. Out of his line comes what we know as the prophet Muhammad. Okay, and then out of Isaac, which Isaac was the promise from God, the one that God came through, you see that Isaac was born, and from Isaac was the nation of Israel, came from there. And then obviously, consequentially, we have Christ. And see, what we see is that they're at enmity, that there is friction between these two. There's a friction between what they birth out of their own control and what was birthed out of God's promise. You see that there was a difference, but there was always been a friction. So today, when you look at the world stage, you see that the Palestinians, okay, which are ancestors of Ishmael, and you see the Jewish people, which are ancestors of Isaac, they're still fighting over this holy land. There still is friction and unrest between them. In the Middle East, there's friction between Christians and Muslims. And all of this was set into motion. This calamity was set into motion because somebody decided to take control when they needed to surrender. And I want you to write this down for those of you that are taking notes, that whatever you do in the flesh will become an enemy to the promise. Let me say it again because you got to get this, that whatever you do in the flesh, whatever you try to control on your own, it will become an enemy to your promise. Listen, single people, sometimes you're going, man, I'm believing God for a Christian man. I'm believing God for a Christian woman. And you've waited and you have this desire and you've waited, but man, it's just not working out. Then you meet this person at work or you meet this person at school. And you're like, man, they got like really beautiful eyes. Whoa, man, they got a great smile. Whoa, they have a fantastic personality. And you're going, well, I know the Bible says not to be unequally yoked with unbelievers, but you know what? I'm so good at control, I bet I can change them. And you know what ends up happening? 99% of the time, that person ends up becoming an enemy of the promise that God has on your life. And there's hurt and pain and damage done to your soul as a result of you taking control because you couldn't wait for God's perfect timing. We have parenting issues where people try to take control over their children. There's a term called helicopter parenting. It's like you're hovering over their life, and it's like you've determined, I'm going to take control over them because you know what? I'm better at protecting them than God is. I'm better at keeping them safe than God is. Like we said, you're good at it until you're not. And see, many of us, we don't realize that we're trying to control their lives. And parents, let me tell you this, okay? Veronica and I, we're on the other side of the hill now, okay? We've raised two great kids who live on their own. And we found out some things. And there's some things that I need to say to you. See, when you try to control these young people's lives, they will grow to resent you. Because they feel like they're not living a life that God's called them to live. You're not spurring them on and encouraging them to live out what God's called. They just feel like they're a part of your life. They feel like they're a part of your plan. And as you're running your plan and your control, they just feel like they're being drug along into everything that you're just doing instead of you pouring fuel on what they have been called to do as well. We need to acknowledge that. And I just want to challenge you with that. Guys, when it comes to parenting issues, you got to surrender your kids to God. You got to hand them over. You got to trust him with your kids. You can't control everything. And see, with this helicopter parenting, this hovering over them and, like you're just there, there's fallout from that. There's damage. In the Huffington Post, it was maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, there was this article that was crazy. It says that 8% of college graduates were taking a parent with them on their first interview. This is crazy. I'm going to tell you, as Hub City Church grows, we will be hiring people here. And young people, hear me. Leave mama in the car, okay? That'll be strike number 1. But the point is that some of us, we are so in control over our kids and our marriage and our household and everything that we get, man, we grab it. It's like mine, mine, mine. And we're hanging on to it so tight. But listen, you're going to end up causing problems. Your control is going to become an enemy to the promise of God on your life. We need to loosen up. We need to let some things go. So I have a question for you today. What is it that you're trying to control? What is it that right now, like you can say, you know what, I'm feeling challenged by the Holy Spirit right now. I am trying to control this area. I want you to think about it. We've got to get a name, attach a name to that thing. You know what, I'm trying to control my career. I'm trying to control my kids. I'm trying to control my spouse. I'm trying to control my family. I'm trying to control my finances. I felt challenged at the beginning of the year to make God first with my tithe, but now it's like, oh man, like if I do that, we're not going to have enough. And you've yanked control back instead of surrendering and saying, God, I'm going to be generous. I'm going to answer what you're calling me to do. And what I want you to do right now is that as you think about it, as you're putting a name to it, I want you to write it down. What is it that you've been trying to take control of? It's your spouse, finances, kids, your own health. And we need to get to a place where we're willing to surrender that control. What's the choice today? This or that? You're going to stay in control. You're going to be birthing things that are enemies to God's promise. Or you can surrender it all to him and embrace the promise that God has for you. The choice is yours. So what I want to do is I want to give you 3 questions today. Okay? 3 questions on how to know when is the right time to surrender or when's the right time to control some certain things. Because there are some things that you need to take control over, and there's some things that you need to surrender, and I want to help you to be able to define what is what. So number 1 is this, okay? Number 1 question is it worth my concern? Okay, so listen, when you are operating as a control freak, which I have been guilty of too in my own life, liking to have control over things, trying to protect image, trying to protect my dreams and hopes, you have to be very wise on how you respond to things that are happening around you, okay? Understanding, should I really be concerned with this? Okay, because here's what happens, is that if you're into a place where you love control, you're going to be the type of person that you feel like you need to guard everything. And so you're going to be, you're going to speak about it. Don't do this, don't do that. Very bossy, very controlling in every way. And this is what happens, is that everybody comes with a little fire inside their heart, a little passion on what they feel like they want to do or what they've been called to do. And you know what happens when we control people? We take water and we extinguish the fire that's burning inside of their heart. As I mentioned before, because they feel like you're trying to control them to make them part of what you're doing instead of answering the call of God that is on their life. See, some of you struggle because your children, especially as they become adults, you don't want to let them go because you want them to play that role or that part in your life. But God has locked dreams inside of their hearts. And you know what we need to do? Instead of controlling them and pouring water on the fire, we need to put gasoline on that thing. Ignite what God has put on the inside of them. Encourage them. And it's hard to do because those of us that are control freaks, we want people to think like we think. We want people to act like we act. We want people to do what we want them to do because we have this little world that we've created and envisioned, and everybody plays their part in your story. But the reality is that God has a story that he's put on the inside of them. And God has locked a piece. He's so vast that God has locked a piece of himself in each and every person. And we need to be able to acknowledge that and say, you know what? I may not see it like you see it. I may not have that same passion, but man, I'm going to do everything to relinquish control and let you fly and let you become who God has created you to be. Come here, I'm going to pour gas on that thing. Even though I don't understand it, I may not agree with all of it, but come on, let's put some gas on that thing. And the only way that you can do that is if you determine this one thing, and it's, is it worth my concern? See, some of us were so short-sighted. And Veronica and I, we made that mistake in raising our kids. And I'm going to be vulnerable. I'll be transparent with that. There were certain things that I was so concerned with them, but I'm going to give you this question that you need to ask yourself, and it's going to help you. Is this thing that I'm concerned with, will it matter in 5 years? Let me say it again. Is the thing that you're concerned with, will it matter in 5 years? See, when some of us, we look at our kids and they're a part of our image, okay? They're a part of the way that people perceive us. So we're like, oh, man, you can't go outside with your hair looking like that. You can't go outside. You don't match. And we start putting this control and stuff on all and everyone that is around us. In 5 years, it's not going to matter. They're not going to flunk out of college because one day they had a funny haircut. They're not going to fail as a spouse because one day they didn't go out and match or they had the wrong shoes on. And some of us, we don't realize that we are micromanaging everybody's life and we're controlling, and what we're doing is just pouring water on them, pouring water on their dreams, pouring water on the personality that God has given them, pouring water on the hopes that they have locked in their hearts. Let me say this. When you're building something, whether it's a family, a business, ministry, When you're building something, you can have control or you can have growth, but you can't have both. When it comes to relationships, you can have control or you can have intimacy, but you can't have both. The decision's yours today, guys, is that, like I said, you can be snuffing it out, cold water, or you can be pouring gasoline and igniting it. How do we do that? Is we surrender everything to God. And he's going to speak to you. There were times as we were raising our children, there was times when it came to our marriage. There was times when it came to our businesses. There was time when it came to our ministry that God would speak to us and he says, hey, you need to be concerned about that. And we'd be like, yes, sir. And it was direction from the Lord, and we would be concerned about it, and we would press into it. And we found some things out, and we would investigate, and we found, things that were a detriment to our family, and we guarded, and we spoke up, and we handled those things. But there were other things that we were concerned with that I look back and I go, man, I really wish that I wouldn't have done that. There were times, as us being on the other side of all this now, I look at my kids and I go, man, like I'd be so mad if they put fingerprints on the window. I'd be mad if they smashed Cheerios in the back seat of the car. And now here we are with no children and our home's quiet in the evening. And some of the things that drove us nuts in those days, we miss them now. We miss those things. And I know that some of you that are hearing my voice, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Ask yourself the question, is this something I need to be concerned with? Here's the second question that I have for you. I hope that you guys are getting something out of this very, very practical message today. Number 2 is it mine to control? Okay, is it mine to control? And so there's a difference between surrendering control and relinquishing responsibility. I need to say that again. If you're taking notes, there's a difference between surrendering control and relinquishing responsibility. Listen, guys, there is a part that God plays and there is a part that you play. See, often I hear people, I was just praying that God would be a God of breakthrough. And the whole time God is saying, listen, I need you to start moving. I need you to start, asking some questions. I need you to pick up the phone and start working through some stuff. You got to prime the pump. God's like, you got to give me something to work with. See, God is not going to do your part. See, God is the God of the impossible. So I'm going to do the possible, and I'm going to trust God to do the impossible. I'm going to work with him. It's easier to steer a moving car, is it not? And so listen to what Matthew 7:7 says. It says, ask, and it will be given to you. Ask. Come on, you got to move to ask. It says seek and you will find. Seek is like a proactive thing. I'm seeking it out. Knock and the door will be open to you. Ask, seek, knock. Okay, there is a part that you and I play, and we need to ask ourselves this. Okay, God, I feel like I want to take control, over this, but how much of it should I take control? What is my part and what is your part? And God will show you. He'll speak to you. There's some real practical things. Listen, some of you young men right now, I'll be real straight with you, okay? Might even hurt your feelings, but it's going to be good for you. Some of you, it's like you have a dream of being married and having a family someday, and you're still in mama's basement playing Call of Duty with your headset on. You got no deodorant. You didn't even brush your teeth that day. Let me challenge you. You got to get out of the basement. You got to get yourself a job. You got to turn that game off. You got to brush your teeth, put some deodorant on, start making some money, make yourself available. Come on. Some of you girls are like, come on, Pastor, get them. Yeah, I'm going to get them. Because this generation needs to understand that there is a part that you play. We can't just be hucking prayers up. Jesus, got a breakthrough. Jesus, open a door. And even if he opened a door, you'd be so distracted down in the basement, you wouldn't even know what to do. I'm calling you out. I'm calling you forward today, my friends. All of us have this part that we have to play. Some of us with our finances. Come on. It's like God's like, hey, you guys are in massive debt, and you're going, man, we just don't make enough money. But in reality, maybe you do, but your spending habits are just out of control. So at the end of the month, you don't got nothing left. But God has blessed you, and you keep praying for more blessing, and God's going, I've given you enough, but you're not managing what I've given you. Some of you in your areas of relationship and marriage, your marriage is struggling. COVID has had its effect. You guys have been like kind of at each other's throats, and the stress of not being able to get out and get away just a little bit of time to get a breath, kids everywhere and all these things. I understand that's real. And for some of you, you're going to have to take the step and do your part. You're going to have to reach out and say, you know what? We need some help. We need some counseling. Pastor Steve, Veronica, can we meet with you? Can we get some time? Can we talk through this stuff? We're really struggling right now. You know, maybe you need to get into a small group and start talking things out and being able to work on this thing. That's your part. Maybe you need to get into a freedom group. You need to start working on the baggage that you brought into the relationship that has been causing strife and friction and say, hey, like, we got to unpack this stuff. We need to heal so we can move forward. That is your part. God isn't going to do that for you. You got to start taking steps forward to find freedom, to find health, to be able to move forward into all that God has for you. You do have a part, and that has to be a question. When you want to take control, do I need to be concerned about this or not? Is it going to pass the 5-year test? And also, you need to be able to ask yourself, is this my thing that I need to be doing? And God is going to show you. He's going to say, yes, you need to do this part. Or he's going to say, hey, yo, take your hands off that. And that leads us to our third and final question. Is it for God alone? That's your last question. Is it for God alone? Philippians 4, chapter 4, verse 6. It says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your requests to God. There are some things, guys, that you are just going to have to go to God in prayer and just hand that thing over. I love how he says, do not be anxious about anything. If there is anything that marks people who are trying to stay in control, is that they're anxious and they're afraid of losing control. And that's why he's saying, do not be anxious about anything. And he's saying, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. Listen, prayer is never a last resort. It should be your very first step. It is the front line way of warring, guys. We take everything to God. And this is why it's so important when it comes to control, because sometimes we're trying to control things that are God's alone. And if you spent time with him, you would understand that he's trying to say, hey, yo, take your hands off. That's not yours to deal with. That's mine. I am the God of the breakthrough. I am the God of the promise. And I'm going to make this thing happen. He's going to let you know. You know, let me be transparent with you. And I'm going to close out with this story. Veronica and I, we got married really young, okay? We got married when we were 20 years old. Then we had Lindsay at 21. We had Steven at 22. So, man, our life, it's like we got shot out of a cannon. Boom! We were off to the races, man. Life was crazy. It was hectic. But here's the issue is we both came into a relationship with baggage. We came in with false expectations. We both came in with this idea that we were going to control and fix one another. Okay, she had her idea of what a healthy, stable family would look like. I had an idea of what a healthy, stable family would look like, and this is why it wasn't working, because she was steering and controlling, trying to pull me over to here, and I was trying to pull her over to here. We were both trying to be in control. And the hardest part of it all is that the issues we were facing were heart issues. So yeah, we would argue over towels. Yes, we would argue over the car. We argued about everything. And it seemed like if we could just fix the peripheral things, you know, the fact that I liked dinner a certain way and she liked it a certain way, and I wanted this and she wanted that. We thought if we could fix those things, that somehow it would all make sense. But the reality is we need a deep heart change. And the only one that can change the heart is God himself. And that's why I'm saying, is it for God alone to do? Are you trying to control certain areas and make things happen, and you're so focused on the outside, but failing to realize that the real change that needs to happen within the walls of your home, within your own walls of who you are, it has to be something on the inside that only God can do. This is what ends up happening. At the time, we were at a different church, and Veronica ends up at this women's group. And guys, I'm going to tell you, a miracle began to happen. She was there and she got around community and she began to get, discipled by these women and what it meant to be a wife and what it meant to be a mother and what it meant to be a daughter of God. And man, there was just this fire on the inside of her. And you know what started happening? Is something started to change. She was kinder. She was more patient. She was gentle. She was not so argumentative. And I was like, man, who is this person? But see, I didn't want to be controlled by her. And I started to notice she started to trust God, and she started putting me in God's care. And one day she just came up and she says, you know what, I'm done trying to change you, and I'm just going to keep praying for you. And I was like, whoa. I was like, dang, she's sticking the big dogs, man. She's going to Jesus about me. I was like, dang, all right, like she's serious about this thing. But you know what started to happen? As she was changing on the inside, her heart was changing, she stopped trying to control me. And all of a sudden, that created space for God to do something inside me. And as she was kind, I found myself wanting to be kind to her. And as she was gentle, I found myself wanting to be gentle. And then all of a sudden, our marriage began to blossom because I started wanting to do things for her. You know, I really cared for her, and I wanted to do things, and I was doing things without expectations of her doing something back for me. And all of a sudden, healing started to take place, and my walls started coming down, and her walls started coming down. And all of a sudden, I'm praying for her, and she's praying for me. And God is just doing something very, very special within us in our marriage. And then that trickled over into our home. And we began to believe and say, well, you know, if we could trust God with our marriage, and we could trust God with our finances, if we could trust God with our finances, we can trust Him with our kids. And that whole thing began to trickle and to begin to touch things. And we learn the art of surrender. And how was it? Is that we understood that some things are for God alone. Today, listen to me, my friend. Don't give up on your spouse if you've been believing for him. But you got to take it to prayer and say, God, this is for you alone. Maybe you're a child, maybe a teenager you have, or an adult child has really disappointed you with the decisions that they've been making lately. Don't give up on them. You take it to prayer and say, God, I believe that this is for you alone. I've already tried. I've talked to them, and it just feels like I'm talking to a wall. They're not listening. They're doing their own thing. And God, this is for you alone, and I'm going to acknowledge right now and use wisdom to understand that that's what's happening. The other part is you might have dreams in your heart, and just as Abraham and Sarah, you know, they were waiting for the son, and you're being tempted right now to just give in and to take control and do it yourself. And what I say to you today is, listen, relinquish that control. Surrender it to God. Don't give up. Keep believing. Okay, His timing is perfect. He's got you. Young people, let me talk to you, my teenagers, junior hires, and high schoolers. I want you to hear it right now. Maybe in life right now, you don't understand mom and dad, and maybe they've been harsh, maybe they've been critical, or maybe you feel like you've been hurt and you have walls up towards them. And it's been hard to respect them lately. Can I just tell you, don't give up on mom and dad. Keep praying for them. Acknowledge right now and say, you know what, I've been trying to control this, and I'm hanging on to it, and it's stressing me out, and it's making me feel bad about my life. It's making me feel bad about myself. But acknowledge in this moment, young people, that God, this is for you, and this is for you alone to deal with. I'm asking you right now, God, will you change my dad's heart? God, I'm asking you right now, will you change my mom's heart? God, I'm asking you, will you change my sister and my brother's heart? It's been hard to live here in this house lately, but God, right now, I'm going to surrender this to you. Challenging all of you today to make the choice. Is it this or is it that? Are you going to live a life of control, or are you going to live a life of surrender? I'm going to trust today that you're going to live a life of surrender. Let me pray for you. God, we just come before you right now. I know that people's hearts have been pricked. I know that people's hearts are being stoked and that you're doing something right now in this moment. God, I just ask right now that as we make a decision today to surrender our lives to you, to put all of our trust in you, God, we're giving you our hearts, we're giving you our minds, we're going all in, God. We're not holding anything back. I'm just asking you right now, God, to move on their behalf in a supernatural way. God, I'm asking you to move in such a way that people would understand that you have a great plan for their life, that you would move in such a way, God, that they would know that you can be trusted, God, that you are one, you are a rock, you are the one, you are a refuge, you are the one that we rely on. God, and I just pray for those of us that have been in the bad habit of being self-sufficient, God, and controlling everything and controlling everybody around us, every situation. We don't let anything slide. God, I pray that today we would experience your peace that surpasses all understanding. God, that those that are afraid to let go of that control, that are afraid to trust, God, I just ask that you would empower them by your Spirit to trust in a way that they've never trusted before. God, show yourself strong. Show yourself real, God, in these times. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.